Our goal should be to live life in radical amazement, writes Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. To be spiritual is to be amazed. Never once in my life did I ask God for success or wisdom or power or fame. I asked for wonder, and he gave it to me. Today I want to talk about inspiration and consider this question: is meaning found, or is it made, or both? Sometimes the world catches us by surprise, and we're struck with this kind of Heschelian wonder. Things align so elegantly, we feel an overwhelming sense of beshert, of destiny. This month marks 5 years since my great-aunt Ursula died, and I had an experience like that while officiating at her funeral. Though she lived a good long life, I was devastated to learn of Ursula's passing. She was a Holocaust survivor, having endured the terror of Terezin and the death of her parents, but she made a good life filled with family, food, joy, and laughter. Ursula never shed her thick German accent, but when people hearing her speak would ask her where she was from, she would reply, Paducah, Kentucky. Paducah was where she and my Uncle Dave raised their 2 girls, Ellen and Joyce. Ellen later moved to St. Louis, and her mom joined her from Southern California when she could no longer live independently. We were on vacation when I got word of my beloved aunt's passing. In fact, we were on a Caribbean cruise. I had brought a lovely Hawaiian shirt and some decent clothes, but no dress winter coat for a frigid Midwestern funeral, and surely no dark suit appropriate for officiating. I also didn't have my rabbi's manual, that essential resource filled with prayers, psalms, and readings for various life cycle occasions. Surprisingly, the funeral home in St. Louis did not keep a spare copy, so Ellen's husband, Chuck, asked his former retired assistant rabbi, Rabbi Davidson, if he had a spare rabbi's manual for me to use. The rabbi fished his decades-old and well-worn book out of the Geniza box. For those who may not know, it's forbidden to simply discard sacred books with God's name. Instead, we bury them the way we would an irreparable Sefer Torah or tefillin that have outlived their usefulness. Holy books are afforded the same kavod as human beings. We bury them. The old rabbi's manual was held together with a rubber band, but worked well enough to get me through the service. I asked my cousin Chuck to ask Rabbi Davidson if he wanted me to bury the manual in the grave with my Aunt Ursula, with her casket, since it was to go into the Geniza anyway. The rabbi said he'd be grateful if I did so. I explained to the assembled whose manual this was and why I was placing it into the grave. I made some crack about how Ursula, who loved to read, would have chosen better reading material. And then we began to fill the grave. And something remarkable happened. While attendees were taking turns with the shovel, blanketing Aunt Ursula with the earth of her final resting place, a cemetery worker came up to me. Now you can imagine how these laborers who work in cemeteries come to know the headstones, and this man knew them well. He gestured to the left of the open grave, pointing out that within this very large Jewish cemetery, the adjacent plot belonged to Rabbi Davidson's parents. What's the definition of beshert? A sacred book carried for decades, an entire rabbinic career, by a rabbinic colleague, a manual used to bury who knows how many people, including perhaps his own family members, maybe even his parents, not to mention countless weddings, brises, and more, ends up buried in the same earth as the owner's own parents. Sometimes we stumble upon a holy moment or a holy place where God finds us. That's what it felt like on December 31st, 2019, as COVID was gathering in the east and my family huddled around a grave in America's gateway to the west. In our Parsha, too, Yaakov has a holy encounter. You'll recall that he's fleeing his brother Esav, having taken his birthright and stolen his blessing. Esav is mad, so mad he wants to kill Yaakov. And at the beginning of our Parsha, Yaakov is fleeing for his life. And the text tells us, Vayetzei Yaakov miBe'er Sheva, Vayelech Harana. Jacob left Beersheba and he set out for Haran. And he came upon a certain place and he stopped there for the night, for the sun had set. Taking one of the stones in that place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place. And he had a dream, a stairway where a ladder was set on the ground and its top reached to the sky, and the messengers of God were going up and down it, and standing beside him was God, who said, I am Hashem, the God of your father Abraham, and the God of Isaac. The ground on which you are lying I will assign to you and to your offspring. And then God blesses Yaakov and reassures him he will be afforded divine protection. Yaakov awakens from his sleep and proclaims, Achen yesh Hashem b'makom hazeh, ve'anochi lo yadati. Surely God is present in this place, and I did not know it. So think about your own life. Perhaps you can remember a time like this when the heavens opened up, when things came into focus, when the world, even for a moment, seemed full of possibility. God found Yaakov in that place, and our tradition suggests it was no ordinary place. Ibn Ezra says the reason the verse reads Vayifga b'makom with the definite article instead of b'makom, a place, is that Yaakov came upon not just any old place, but the holiest of places. And Rashi reminds us that word makom, place, with the definite article, shows up a bit earlier in Genesis when Avraham brings Yitzchak to sacrifice him. Vayar et hamakom merachok. On the third day, Avraham lifted his eyes and saw the place from afar. Which place is this? Rashi says that both places are the same, Mount Moriah, the place on which generations later a redeemed people would return to their homeland and build the holy temple. But notice something interesting in the text. Abraham does something specific before seeing the place where he is to offer up his son. He lifts his eyes. Abraham is looking for something. And remember, God has already told him that there is a specific destination. Take your son and go to the land of Moriah. This iconic tale shares an important feature with another iconic Torah story of another great leader. Any idea which one? Moses at the burning bush. So just after Moshe discovers the Sneh she'enenu ukal, the bush which burns but is not consumed, the Torah says, Vayomer Moshe asura na ve'er'eh et hamar'eh hagadol hazeh, madua lo yiv'ar hasneh. Moses said, I must turn aside and look at this marvelous sight. Why doesn't the bush burn up? Now, there are two possible ways to read the scene, I think. Possibly Moshe sees the bush, sees the Malach Hashem, God's angel, is overwhelmed with surprise, with wonder. In other words, he, like Yaakov, stumbles on a holy place and responds to it in kind. And similar to Yaakov, the place he discovers is not just any place. Yaakov discovers Har Zion, the site of the future Beit HaMikdash. Where is Moshe? Now Moses, tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian, drove the flock into the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. Moshe is at Har Horeb. What the book of Deuteronomy clarifies is another name for Har Sinai, Mount Sinai, that other holy mountain. But there's a hint in Exodus that perhaps the Moshe story is not quite like Abraham's, where the destination is intended and clear, and also not quite like Yaakov's, where the experience is holy, L-L-Y, and I guess holy, H-O-L-Y, chance encounter with God. Because unlike Abraham, Moshe is just out tending his flock. The reader knows he has arrived to the mountain of God, but Moshe doesn't know that. He's never met God. He's a palace brat, come fugitive, come shepherd. And this might be why the text says, Vayar Hashem kisar lirot. When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to look, God called to him out of the bush, Moshe, Moshe, and he answered, Hineni, here I am. Think about it. Bushes on fire are not necessarily a sign of anything. Flammable materials sometimes burn, as we all learned Thursday night along the JFX. What's interesting about the bush isn't that it's on fire, it's that the fire is not all that interested in the bush. It's the lasting nature of that fire, which is to say the eternal nature of God, that Moshe notices, and to which God responds. Avraham is proactive. Once he has his instructions, he pursues his mission until instructed otherwise. He lifts his eyes, seeking his destination. Yaakov is reactive. He's tired, so he takes a nap. He closes his eyes, and then God shows up. But Moshe and God, they react to one another. Their encounter is dialogical. It works because Moshe is a man in search of holiness. He, like Heschel, asks for wonder. And the Holy One, waiting behind the subtlest of signs, provides it. In his aptly titled book, God in Search of Man, Heschel writes, as civilization advances, the sense of wonder declines. Such decline is an alarming symptom of our state of mind. Mankind will not perish for want of information, but only for want of appreciation. The beginning of our happiness lies in the understanding that life without wonder is not worth living. Jewish tradition asks us to wonder, but it also asks us to organize our lives around behaviors meant to uplift the everyday, to instigate holiness. Rabbi Max Kedushin, the early 20th century thought leader and Hillel director from my alma mater, the University of Wisconsin, calls this normal mysticism. Kedushin points out that while experiences of natural beauty are to be cherished and celebrated, Jewish living is everyday living. God is no less present at a Shabbat table or even a work break room than on a mountaintop. God is where you let him in, taught the Cotzin Rabbi. However, I don't know if practice makes perfect, but Judaism suggests that praxis makes purpose. That is, if we're willing to turn aside and notice the holy possibilities of everyday existence, the worthiness of life will reveal itself to us. So, is meaning found or made? Typically, I think it's both. Most of the time, it has to be both if it is to be truly meaningful. And that's my prayer for us this week. Sure, if God calls out to us like Abraham, we should listen. Maybe we should obey. Perhaps sometimes we shouldn't, but we should listen. If God surprises us like Jacob, as I was surprised 5 years ago at Aunt Ursula's graveside, we should be grateful and more open to mystery. But my hope is that barring these two very rare types of encounter, we not despair of wonder and possibility, that we should go forth not expecting to be Abraham or Jacob, but trying to be a bit more like Moses, looking for eternality in the ordinary. That we should be more like Heschel, asking for wonder. Or as singer-songwriter Dar Williams writes in her book, How to Write a Song That Matters, the best way to court inspiration is to simply pause and recognize when it has come to us. But she asks, if inspiration doesn't come to us, the eternal question is, how do we get there when we're standing here? In a world of jamming copy machines, piles of dishes, and traffic-snarled work commutes? Her answer? We cultivate what she calls poetic thinking. I found out, Dar Williams writes, that walking along rivers, going to museums, and sneaking out to matinees of blockbuster movies were equally effective for opening the window. So this week, go open a window and see what you see. Shabbat Shalom.